can be accused of anything here at this church, it's that we spend a lot of time. Like a lot of time. Some might even say too much time trying to unpack, trying to untangle, trying to decipher the often cryptic stories that we find in our Bible. Written between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago to appeal to the sensibilities of Middle Eastern farmers and goat herds and fishermen who spoke languages that we do not speak and who lived in cultures that are vastly different from our own. It, of course, makes a lot of sense that the stories that we find in the Bible are hard for us to understand. And so we have to put in a lot of effort just to be able to wrap our minds around them. And in fact, that's what we spend a lot of time in this room doing. But then we have stories like this morning's What a Gift. I don't care who you are. I don't care what language you speak. I don't care what culture you come from. I don't care if you read real good or not. This story just makes sense. It's almost impossible to misunderstand. We're told that 10 men afflicted with leprosy come to Jesus in order to be healed. He sends them away to the temple priest who would verify that they are no longer contagious and that they could safely return to the religious community. As those lepers go away, we are told that they are miraculously healed. Of those 10 lepers, only one returns to give thanks to Jesus. Jesus says unto this man, "Hey now, weren't there 10 of you all? Where are the other 9 men that I healed?" In any case, Jesus praises this one leper and sends him on his way. So obviously, the point of this story is that Jesus is trying to encourage us to be like that one guy who came back and gave thanks. And he's trying to encourage us not to be like those other 9 jokers who wouldn't know how to be grateful even if a gratitude bug came and bit them right on their hearts. Bit them right on the hearts. Right? The moral of this story is so obvious to see for anyone with ears to hear and eyes to see. So the question before us this morning is not what does Jesus want of us. It's very clear in the story that Jesus wants us to have grateful hearts. But rather the question before us is one of how. How do we get to a place of gratitude? How do we get to be more like that first guy who came back and gave thanks? How do we lead lives that are marked with gratitude for all the good gifts we have around them? And to answer this question, I think it's helpful for us to shift our focus from the story that happened in Israel some 2,000 years ago and move our focus to a story that happened in all places in Rwanda some 25 years ago. So those of you of a certain age will no doubt recount the horrific events of the Rwandan genocide that started in April of 1994. After years of escalating tension between 2 ethnic groups in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis, the plane of Rwanda's then president was shot down. Members of the Tutsi ethnic group were blamed. A radio communication from the government called people to arms. And within a matter of hours, Tutsis were being indiscriminately killed by their Hutu neighbors. After just 3 months, the violence subsided, but in that time, some 1 million people were murdered. The majority of the Tutsi minority was wiped out, and most of their murderers were roaming free. And now this country faced the challenge of rebuilding and healing, with the possibility of another outbreak of violence ever looming over them. So enter into this very dire situation psychologist Ervin Straub. Straub himself was a Hungarian Jew who, as a child, managed to survive the Holocaust only because his nanny, who happened to be a Christian, hid both him and his sister in her house until the war was over. So coming out of that experience, Straub was just consumed with the questions of why do people do horrible things to each other? And are you able to stop them from doing those things? And in the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide, Straub decided that after his decades of research and his prestigious career where he got his PhD from Stanford, he lectured over at Harvard, he was invited around the globe to lecture on the causes of genocide and how to prevent it. After decades of study and research and theory, he decided that giving speeches was no longer enough. And he wanted to now put those theories into action. And so he got on a plane and he went to Rwanda to help them make sure that something like this never happened again. So one thing that Straub knew from his research was that one of the greatest barriers to the spread of hate between two disparate groups was strong interpersonal relationships between members of those groups, especially marriages. He found that those were a very strong buffer against violence and hate from spreading. So what Straub wanted to do was he wanted to go to Rwanda and he wanted to set up some sort of program that would encourage intermarriage between the Hutus and the Tutsis in the hopes of forming this bulwark of relationship against any future violence. So after several months there of being on the ground, he learned something interesting about Rwandan culture. And that is, whereas in America, everybody has a TV and everybody sits around the TV at night to take in their favorite shows, in Rwanda, radio was king. Every single day, large groups of family and friends would gather together to listen to the latest music, the latest news, and in particular, they would gather to listen to radio soap operas, which were a staple of Rwandan pop culture. And so he got this idea in his head upon learning this. After all, it was radio messaging from the government that first incited the violence that led to the Rwandan genocide. And so Straub got to wondering, could the radio be used for the reverse purpose? Could the radio be used to actually bring people together? And so with that, he set out to create a radio program that would encourage intermarriage between the Hutus and the Tutsis. So he got to work doing it. He recruited a Belgian NGO that produced radio content and a group of Rwandan writers. And he created this program called Musu Keweya. And I apologize to Rwandans everywhere for my upstate New York pronunciation of that word. But this radio program told the story of two villages and two star-crossed lovers from rival ethnic groups. And while he didn't specifically name the Hutus and the Tutsis, the stories were written so that they could very clearly see themselves in the stories that were being told. And the good news about this show was that it was an immediate sensation. The entire nation was tuning in every single week to listen to these stories. And after several years of this will they or won't they drama, when the two main characters finally were set to get married, listeners actually called in and demanded that the radio producers put on a live-action wedding event at the National Stadium so that everybody could show up and watch this wedding of these now beloved characters. That's how massively popular this show was. That's the good news. The bad news, however, is that when a Princeton researcher came in about a year after the show debuted to kind of see what effects it was having in Rwandan culture, she unfortunately found that it was not changing their beliefs at all. While people were tuning in every week and hanging on every plot point of this series, they still did not believe in intermarriage, and they still did not believe that intermarriage would help in any way to prevent future violent outbreaks in their country. However, interestingly and counterintuitively, she did find that it was having some effect on Rwandan culture. And specifically, what she found was that it was actually increasing the rate of intermarriage between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Measurably, demonstrably, after the show debuted, Hutus and Tutsis started getting married more often. So while their beliefs didn't change, their behavior did. It's kind of wild, right? But what does that have to do with anything? Why do we care that people's behavior can change but their beliefs don't? Well, in the series, as we're talking about burnout and we're talking about how hard it is after these 2 years of pandemic living, when we look around and everything looks gloomy, and we're tired, and we're exhausted, and we're not really feeling grateful about anything, about how the world has been going, what the example of this show tells us, suggests to us, is that if we want to get to a place of gratitude, if we want to get to a place where we can appreciate the gifts in our lives as really as gifts and say thanks to God for them, what the example of this show suggests is that we should just start saying thank you. Even for trivial things, and even if we don't feel like it. So you get out of bed in the morning. You go to pour yourself a bowl of cereal. You grab milk out of the fridge, and you note that it has already passed its expiration date. However, you open it up, you give it a whiff, and it has not yet spoiled. Thank you, God, for this unspoiled milk. You leave your house, get in your car to go to work, go wherever you're going. You get buckled up. You go to plug in your phone to get your CarPlay up and running, but then you realize that you forgot your phone somewhere in your house. You unbuckle. You get out of your car. You unlock your front door. Your dogs are going crazy because they already think you're back for the day. You go to scrounge around your house for the phone, and it is in the very first place that you look. Thank you, God, that I didn't have to look any harder than that. You get to work. You had to sit through another soul-sucking meeting that could have been, that should have been a 3-sentence email. And yet here you are having to suffer through it. And it was scheduled to last for 60 minutes, but lo and behold, you get out after just 57 minutes. Thank you, God, for these 3 minutes to ourselves. You get home at night. Of course, you're not in the mood to cook, so what do? You order Indian from Guru the Caterer right down here, down the street. Best Indian food in the greater Boston area. You order your very favorite combo, saag paneer and garlic naan. But when the Grubhub guy drops it off, you realize that they didn't give you your garlic naan that you had ordered and paid for, but rather they just gave you regular old naan. Thank you, God, for this daily bread, even if it's not the particular daily bread that I was looking for, and even if I'm going to call and ask for a refund after. What the example of this show tells us, what it suggests to us, and what copious amounts of psychological research into gratitude confirms, is that if we start saying thank you, if we start identifying things in our lives to be thankful for, if we start acting in grateful ways, slowly, over time, our hearts and our minds will catch up. They'll follow suit. And we'll get to a place where we actually feel gratitude, and we look around and we see more and more things that we can be grateful for in our lives. And in a moment of time when we're tired, we're exhausted, and we're angry, and we're weary, and our lives feel rotten, and we just want this pandemic to be over. I mean, what a beautiful, beautiful gift to look around and even see just little glimmers of things for which to be thankful. And in so doing, we become more and more like that one leper who came back to give thanks to Jesus. And so here in closing, I would just like to say, thank you all for listening.